Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has confirmed to CBS News that he and his wife personally recommended 2 staff members hired by Pete Buttigieg's presidential campaign. Buttigieg and Zuckerberg briefly attended Harvard University as undergraduate students at the same time. And the South Bend, Indiana mayor was one of Facebook's first 300 users. Zuckerberg told our political correspondent Ed O'Keefe that the recommendations were not a sign of official support.
This shouldn't be taken as an endorsement. We have several mutual friends from college who introduced me to Pete a number of years ago. I did a Facebook Live event a couple of years back, so it's kind of widely known that I had met him. And when a number of colleagues who I'd worked with at Facebook or my philanthropic foundation were interested in working there, they asked me or my wife Priscilla to send over their resume, and so I did that. I think that this probably should not be misconstrued as if I'm deeply involved in trying to support their campaign or something like that.
And several 2020 Democratic presidential candidates responded to the news of Zuckerberg's outreach to Buttigieg on the campaign trail.
Someone asked me, hey, would you accept that? I was like, well, I don't know Mark, so it'd be kind of odd. He sent an email being like, hey, hire this person. To me, if someone like Mark Zuckerberg recommends a staffer to you, then you just assume then you should take a look at that person because they're probably very smart and good at their job and have very relevant expertise. So to me, it would have been surprising if Pete didn't take a look at those staffers or potential staffers.
My views on Mark Zuckerberg are pretty clear. He runs a company that has too much political power. They already have way too much influence in Washington. And they are helping drive every conversation in a way that will protect Mark Zuckerberg and his company, but that undermines our democracy. This is why I have said I think it's time to enforce the antitrust laws that are already on the book. We need to break up these big tech companies. We need to restore democracy in this country. We need a little more competition in these markets, and I think we can do it.
Well, meanwhile, Buttigieg appears to be the emerging favorite among Democratic donors in Silicon Valley. Bloomberg reports that the mayor is out, raising for former VP Joe Biden by a 5-to-1 margin. Well, CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me now from Des Moines, Iowa. So, Caitlin, what are really the advantages and the disadvantages of being a Silicon Valley favorite in this primary race?
Well, the Buttigieg campaign has responded to this, saying that these suggestions from Zuckerberg and his wife were completely unsolicited. And I think that really illustrates how we've seen over the past decade or so Democrats really kind of fall out of love with big tech, especially Silicon Valley and companies like Facebook. You know, in 2008, when Barack Obama was a candidate, he went to Silicon Valley and met with the Google CEO, made it kind of part of his campaign. Over the next decade or so, you saw, of course, Facebook being a way that the Russians used to meddle in the 2016 elections. There has been, the grilling of Mark Zuckerberg on Capitol Hill by lawmakers who don't think that he and his company were held accountable enough. And you even hear it from voters. And that's what you're hearing from Elizabeth Warren and her pledge to break up companies like Facebook, who she says have way too much power. But on the other hand, you have Democrats who have been going to Silicon Valley to fundraise. It's always been a way for Democrats to raise money. Now it has comes with a little more controversy, but I think it's really interesting to see that this story surrounding Buttigieg has become a story at all, and I think that tells you kind of everything you need to know about the Democrats' relationships with Silicon Valley.
And Caitlin, when you look at Buttigieg's approach to the campaign, how has that sort of changed as he's gotten further into this race?
Right. Well, last week on the debate stage, he was making a concerted effort to be kind of the moderate force in this race. And that may be because there is a sense that Joe Biden's campaign, is weakening a bit, but also that there is an opening for a more moderate candidate. But contrast that with how he's talked in past debates about not wanting to let Republicans have their talking points. He said at one point that Republicans are going to call everybody in the Democratic race a socialist anyway, so they might might as well fight this debate on their terms. But his approach that he took in the debate and what he's been talking about here in Iowa has had some effect and has been appealing to a lot of people here. Take a listen to a voter that we talked to at Amy Klobuchar's event the other day who says that she's caucusing for Pete Buttigieg.
I think it would be difficult to get a lot of her ideas through Congress if Barack Obama, with both chambers of Congress on his side, could only do as good as the Affordable Care Act. How are we going to get to Medicare for all? That's one issue. I just think I like her, but she needs somebody to temper her a little bit if she were to get the nomination. Somebody like Amy or Pete could bring her back to the middle a little bit on some of those ideas.
And she was asked when I was talking to that voter, I asked about Elizabeth Warren and whether she could support her. And you know, Pete Buttigieg went pretty hard after Warren in that last debate. So that's who she was referring to there. But I think that reflects what we're seeing at events for Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg and some other candidates, that they're looking for someone that they believe has a broader appeal. And that's been a concern among some Democrats as they're assessing the candidates.
You know, Caitlin, you're talking about broader appeal. I'm wondering, is Michelle Obama going to be running? There's a New York Times report that Democratic Party leaders are actually musing about possibility of another late entry into this race, potentially Hillary Clinton, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, you know, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, and even, I just can't believe this, they're saying Michelle Obama. Is this for real?
You know, I can say that talking to voters here in Iowa and elsewhere, they seem to be more overwhelmed by the number of choices and don't seem to have an appetite for adding any more voices into this race. They're already kind of, you know, have enough to deal with as it is. That piece, I think, you know, reflected something that we see in several cycles, which is that, you know, when you get to a point where you start to see some weaknesses in the front runners or some perceived vulnerabilities, you start to have some second thoughts. But I can say that I really don't hear voters clamoring for someone like a John Kerry, who was also mentioned in that piece, or a Hillary Clinton. They are very much looking at who is in this race now. And so this may be something that's being talked about kind of among Democratic establishment figures, but it's not something that we're hearing on the ground here at all.
Yeah, for folks who haven't been in these states when it's campaign season, boy, you are hounded by TV, mail flyers, everything. So I can't imagine what it's like with all these candidates already. But, you know, some of this sort of appears to be reaction to Joe Biden's campaign. A new poll from Morning Consult found that the former vice president's favorability has dropped 5 points, down to 50% since the last debate. Is his campaign trending, you know, this wrong direction is a concern as it gets closer to voting time?
Yeah, and Joe Biden will be in the state tomorrow, so we'll be going to his campaign events tomorrow. But what we've been hearing from some voters is that they're just interested in these other candidates. And I think when you look at Joe Biden, while he has showed some durability in his campaign, especially against attacks from the president, you're also seeing the rise of Elizabeth Warren, especially in Iowa and New Hampshire. And also, you know, you look at the cash on hand numbers that his campaign reported here, and they are vastly underwhelming, especially when you look at Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Pete Buttigieg. And I think that's interesting because that's why we're seeing some interest in some of these other candidates, and why you're seeing a Buttigieg and a Amy Klobuchar say, look, there may be room for me too.
Okay, and you know, there are more candidates also responding to Friday night, Hillary Clinton, after she publicly implied that Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard was being groomed by Russia. In a tweet, Bernie Sanders called the implication outrageous. How's the former Secretary of State impacting this race? Are you seeing anything on the ground there?
It's been really fascinating to watch how the candidates navigate this. So you had candidates like Pete Buttigieg and Beto O'Rourke compliment Tulsi Gabbard for her service and saying that they don't agree with her policy, but essentially saying that this kind of language coming from Hillary Clinton is not helpful. And then, you know, I asked Amy Klobuchar when we were with her on the campaign bus over the weekend, and she just didn't want to talk about this issue at all. She said this is between them and it's not something I'm getting into. And Elizabeth Warren was asked about it yesterday and just said, no comment, don't want to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it. So this does raise a question about what Hillary Clinton's involvement in 2020 will be, especially since, you know, you hear from a lot of voters that they have some, you know, they're still feeling pretty sore after that loss, and that's why they're trying to look for a winner here.
Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us.